At the temple, there is a poem called Loss carved into the stone. It has 3 words, but the poet has crossed them out. You cannot read loss, only feel it. American inspirational speaker and writer Bob Perks wrote, "I wish you enough loss to appreciate all that you possess." Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson, feeling a sense of loss along with the heartbeat of the internet. I began the webcast with a quote from the narrator who opens the Columbia Pictures DreamWorks production of Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. A few more lines from the opening of the film, and I quote, "A story like mine should never be told, for my world is as forbidden as it is fragile. I certainly wasn't born to the life of a geisha. Like so much in my strange life, I was carried there by the current. The first time I knew my mother was sick was when my father threw the fish back into the sea. That night we went hungry to understand emptiness," he told us. "Mother always said my sister was like wood, as rooted to the earth as the saguaro tree. But she told me I was like water. Water can carve its way even through stone, and when trapped, water makes a new path." End quote. A listener called me some time back to tell me about something he remembered seeing in a poster shop in Montreal back in the mid-1970s. He couldn't remember the author of the quote, or maybe he just forgot, but the words have remained as clear in his mind as when he first read them. He had just lost someone special in his life, and the words seemed to describe exactly what he was feeling at the time. This is what he read. "Anne told me, you only ever fall in love once, truly, and you seldom get the chance to fulfill. So you settle for second best and go on, every so often wishing and hoping for that one true love that could never be yours. The words may vary, but the sentiment on that poster describes a universal experience: love and loss." It was as though 2 machines, wound up and synchronized, had run down at exactly the same time. Their interdependence was so legendary we didn't notice their plight at first. But after a week, not having been seen about, some neighbors thought it best to call. The story is called Cider with Rosie. It was written by Laurie Lee in 1959. She relates the story of one elderly couple in the valley, Joseph and Hannah Brown. The old couple are found in deplorable conditions. She has been unable to start the stove, and her husband is ailing. The authorities were called, and the visiting spinsters arrived. They were both taken away to what was called the workhouse, where he was placed in the men's ward and she in the women's. Lee goes on to write, "It was the first time in all their 50 years that they had ever been separated. They did not see each other again, for in a week they were both dead. I was haunted by their end as by no other, and by the kind, killing authority that arranged it. Divided, their life went out of them, so they ceased as by mutual agreement. Their cottage stood empty on the edge of the common, its front door locked and soundless. Its stones grew rapidly cold and repellent, with its life so suddenly withdrawn. In a year, it fell down, first the roof, then the walls, and lay scattered in a tangle of briars. Its decay was so violent and overwhelming, it was as though the old couple had wrecked it themselves. Soon, all that remained of Joe and Hannah Brown, and of their long, close life together, were some grass-grown stumps, a garden gone wild, some rusty pots, and a dog rose. I was recently reading a piece about one of the longest married couples in the U.S., They celebrated 86 years together at the time and had lived through the Great Depression, a world war, the moon landing, and so many other milestones. You can't help but begin to wonder how they made it that far. There must have been many gains and losses along the way. But you begin to realize that the strong relationships are able to weather the storms of life. And then you realize that they are stronger together than they ever were apart. There had never been much romance to begin with, but something that often wears better: mutual respect and affection. From the first, James Holcroft had entertained the sensible hope that she was just the girl to help him make a living from Hillside Farm, and he had not hoped for or even thought of very much else, except the harmony and good comradeship which bless people who are suited to each other. He had been disappointed in no respect. They had toiled and gathered like ants. They were confidential partners in the homely business and details of the farm. Nothing was wasted, not even time. The little farmhouse abounded in comfort and was the model of neatness and order. If it and its surroundings were devoid of grace and ornament, they were not missed, for neither of its occupants had ever been accustomed to such things. The years which passed so uneventfully only cemented the union and increased the sense of mutual dependence. They would have been regarded as exceedingly matter-of-fact and undemonstrative, but they were kind to each other and understood each other. Feeling that they were slowly yet surely getting ahead, they looked forward to an old age of rest and a sufficiency for their simple needs. Then, before he could realize the truth, he was left alone at her wintry grave. Neighbors dispersed after the brief service, and he plodded back to his desolate home. There was no relative to step in and partially make good his loss. Some of the nearest residents sent a few cooked provisions until he could get help, but these attentions soon ceased. It was believed that he was abundantly able to take care of himself, and he was left to do so. He was not exactly unpopular, but he had been too much reticent and had lived too secluded a life to find uninvited sympathy now. He was the last man, however, to ask for sympathy or help, and this was not due to misanthropy, but simply to temperament and habits of life. He and his wife had been sufficient for each other, and the outside world was secluded chiefly because they had no time or taste for social interchanges. As a result, he suffered serious disadvantages. He was misunderstood and virtually left to meet his calamity alone. But indeed, he could scarcely have met it any other way. Even to his wife, he had never formed the habit of speaking freely of his thoughts and feelings. There had been no need. So complete was the understanding between them. A hint, a sentence, revealed to each other their simple and limited processes of thought. Talk about her now to strangers was impossible. He had no language by which to express the heavy, paralyzing pain in his heart. I thought I'd take you back in time to the late 1800s and a book called He Fell in Love with His Wife, written by Edward P. Rowe, published in 1886. The book begins with the death of a farmer's much-loved wife. The readers feel his pain with the loss of his life mate, but it is a pain that he keeps to himself from those who people his small world. Over the course of the story, he finds someone to help him on the family farm, a woman by the name of Alida, who later becomes his wife, but in name only. She has arrived with her own painful baggage, a marriage to a man who is married to another woman. Holcroft, the farmer in this story, has rescued her from despair and given her a new lease on life. Their budding romance takes place appropriately in the spring, just as the blossoms are opening, getting their new lease on life. And again I quote, "Not a breath of air was stirring. The lowing of cattle and other rural sounds, softened by distance, came from farmhouses. The birds were at vespers, and their songs, to her fancy, were imbued with a softer, sweeter melody than in the morning. From the adjacent fields came clear, mellow notes that made her nerves tingle. So ethereal yet penetrating were they. She was sure she had never heard such bird music before. When Holcroft came in to supper, she asked, "What birds are those that sing in the field?" "Meadowlarks. Do you like them?" "I never heard a hymn sung that did me more good." "Well, I own up," he said. "I'd rather hear him than much of the singing we used to have down at the meeting house." "It seems to me," she remarked as she sat down at the table, "that I've never heard birds sing as they have today." He replies, "Now I think of it, they've been tuning up wonderfully. Perhaps they've an idea of my good luck," he added smilingly. One final excerpt from the book He Fell in Love with His Wife by Edward P. Rowe. Holcroft's face grew sad rather than troubled as he looked at the old meeting house and not at the landscape. He was sitting near the spot where he spent that long forenoon a few Sundays before, and the train of thought came back again. In his deep abstraction, he almost forgot the woman near him in memories of the past. His old love and lost faith were inseparable from that little white spire in the distance. Alida stole a glance at him and thought, "He's thinking of her," and she quietly strolled away to look for wildflowers. "Yes," muttered Holcroft at last, "I hope Bessie knows. She'd be the first one to say it was right and best for me, and she'd be glad to know that in securing my own home and comfort, I had given a home to the homeless and sorrowful, a quiet, good woman who worships God as she did." He rose and joined his wife, who held towards him a handful of trailing arbutus, rue anemones, bloodroot. "I didn't know they were so pretty before," he said with a smile. His smile reassured her, for it seemed kinder than any she had yet received, and his tone was very gentle. "His dead wife will never be my enemy," she murmured. "He has made it right with her in his own thoughts." End quote. Nicholas Sparks, in Message in a Bottle, wrote, "Loss has been a part of my journey, but it has also shown me what is precious. So has a love which I can only be grateful." I'm Don Jackson, and you're listening to the heartbeat of the Internet. One of the great lines in the TV series Touched by an Angel was this, and I quote, "Grief is a powerful thing. It's a good thing, a healing thing. It's a way to let go of a lot of pain, but it's something to go through, not hold on to." End quote. And that reminds me of a Sufi teaching that I put up on my first website. When the heart weeps for what it has lost, the spirit laughs for what it has found. Alice Steinbach wrote a piece in the Baltimore Sun about dealing with the loss of her mother. Her mother was known to make up stories in order to teach the young daughter a lesson. She wrote, and I quote, "In her fables, talking animals always explained that change is not just an ending, but a beginning as well. You must remember," the wise fox would say, "that the leaves that die in the fall are born again in the spring. Balance and counterbalance, harmony and disharmony, loss and renewal. These seem to be the themes that ran through my mother's stories and her life." End quote. Lois Wise in Good Housekeeping wrote, "Grief never ends, but it changes. It's a passage, not a place to stay. The sense of loss must give way if we're to value the life that was lived." I'm Don Jackson. I hope you will look for me once again at the sound of the heartbeat of the Internet. Have a great day and a good night filled with many sweet dreams.